Can you hear me? If I keep it close enough? I can't top the stories they're telling. The only thing I can say is that when he was in his 50s, that's the year I entered the convent. So I missed all this fun that he's talking about. But the only reason I'm sure that I ended up where I did was that I have a background. My dad had a sister and aunts that were in the convent in La Crosse. They were all German relatives, and my mom had relatives somewhere else. But I went to this Irish community, and that was very different for a German family to have this daughter going to the Irish community. But that's the way it was because I had met them when they taught in Lawler. And those of you that did that too know that they were very special. So when I finished at Mount Mercy for 2 years, this is one good story I have to tell. I'd come home to my dad and mom and tell them, this is what I think I want to do. Dad says, did it take you 2 years of college to figure this out? Although I don't think he spent a whole lot in college in those days. But anyway, Nancy asked me to tell you what it was like to be in the convent. So I don't know whether you want to bear with this, but I don't have very long stories, so mine won't be too convincing. And I'm not trying to convert anybody either. But I did treasure those years that I was in the convent. The beginnings would be, there's a period of maybe 10 months that girls that want to enter have a trial period, and they call that a postulant's time. That was about 10 months, because I entered in 1950 in August, and most of us were sent to college classes at Loris with the men. It was not co-ed then, so the nuns were, just kind of strange people there. And when that period was over, and you as a postulant and the order as the group accepting you decided that everything was going to be okay, it's worth a try. So you were received into what they would call a novice's habit. So we had a white veil and a black gown, and we spent that first year in this white veil, and it was called the canonical year. And the word canon would mean you're learning all the laws of church and the order and what they would expect of you. So after that, and that year, before you received this habit, you were dressed up as a bride, and my sister Joan was not married until the next year, so my mom scrounged around for some relative that had a bridal gown, and then you dress up go into the chapel as the bride, and you leave during the ceremony, and a little bit of hair is trimmed off so that the habit will fit you, because the bridal regalia is gone by then, and you're really into the serious part of this. After a year as a canonical novice, you learned the different things about the order. Your year was spent in learning about church. You learned how to do the prayers that the order would say. And after that year, you had no contact with your family either. And that was another thing, that when you entered at that time, it's different now, there were no plans to visit. You had no home visits. But in the year 55, when my brother John died, we were able to come back home for his funeral, so that was an exception. But there were no home visits other than that. After that year, then the next year, you received a black veil, took first vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and returned to classes. And then after that second year, in 1953, I was sent out. There were 9 of us that started at that time to teach. And the order then was primarily a teaching order. Since the nuns have not been working in schools anymore, their work has turned pretty much to social work with adults and maybe sometimes families, but it's a whole different line of work than it was when I entered. They are not mainly teachers anymore, which, it's different, but everything evolves, and so you just deal with future as it comes. When I finished that year after the first vows, then I was sent out to Timber Lake, South Dakota. My brother tells me they have a sale barn out there. I didn't know that. And he has been there since then. I spent 2 years there teaching 7th and 8th. And one of my greatest mistakes as a teacher, you know, when you're called to the door of the classroom and the students are unsupervised and you're just outside the door, things are not always quiet. So when I went back to the classroom to kind of admonish them, my comment was, and note that I had 2 Indian students in the class, "You were acting like a bunch of Indians." Well, not a good thing for a teacher to say, and not especially. So I swallowed that one and never said it again, that's for sure. So then, after 2 years in Timber Lake, then I was assigned to a new Catholic school that was opening in Epworth, and that school is now closed. It's not open anymore. After 5 years in Epworth, then I was sent to Monona. Spent a couple of years there. You didn't decide where you wanted to go. The powers that be and the order would decide what you need in what school. At that time, there were at least, I'm guessing, about 30 schools that they taught in Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota. That was, I don't think, any in Illinois. And then after 2 years in Monona, I went to St. Paul. They had opened a new school at St. Odelia's, North St. Paul, and spent 5 years there. And after that, I went to Wakan, and when I was in St. Paul, my sister Joan died. And the teachers and the Crozier fathers that were there came to her funeral. When we got back to St. Paul, the assistant pastor says to me, "Are you going to leave the convent and, you know, help take care of your sister's family?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, you know, what else do you say?" But at the time, I just never even thought of that. So after 2 years, I was assigned to teach then in Wakan. And in Wakan, after the second year after she had died, I'm beginning to think, well, maybe that's something to think about. I was happy doing what I was doing, but you don't know what things kind of, you know, make you make decisions. So at that time, I wrote a letter to Lauren. We had always been good friends, and we grew up together. This family is part of my growing up. And so I wrote to Lauren and asked him that I had to talk to him. So he came at Thanksgiving time, and I said, "What would you think about that?" He said, "Well, I thought that'd be a good idea." So I approached the powers that be in the order, and one of the things that the Mother Superior said to me was, "Well, I think I'll send you to the Archbishop." So I have a visit with the Archbishop, and he said, well, what are you going to do if you are denied? You had to get permission to be released from your vows at the time. And I said, well, I don't know. You know, you just have to trust that what you're doing, you just go along. So I won't say his name, but he informed me that he thought maybe the devil was going to be taking care of me. So here you go. I mean, what do? You just have to do the thing that apparently you're inspired to do. But anyway, got the permission apparently, and left at the end of the school year in May. And that's the end of my story. Thank you.
Interesting. I never gave it a thought that that's what happened at the convent. Mostly prayer and work, yeah.
At the clotheslines in heavy woolen clothes. It was hot at the clothesline in Dubuque in woolen clothes, I tell you, in the summertime.
I am sure. Anyway, okay, I'm Mabel. Third oldest. Now I'm the oldest one in the family because Jeanette and Rosemary are both gone. We moved to Iowa when I was in 5th grade, believe it or not, or 3rd grade, I'm sorry. And I was not probably the brightest student because in our arithmetic book, they weren't math back then, one of the questions was, what's the difference between 59 and 89? Well, duh. 5 is different than 8. I had never heard of subtraction being called the difference. I have no idea how long it took me to figure that out, but eventually I did. So anyway, I made friends. Joni was one of my best friends in grade school. And we just basically survived. You know, we went to school. Mom and Dad and us kids, I'm going to regress, moved to Iowa back in 1939. We drove at the outrageous speed of 35 miles an hour from Hampshire, Illinois to Lawler, Iowa. With 6 of us kids in the car. I can't believe, I think Roger was probably sleeping in the back window. But anyway, this is what happened. Dad had decided that he had learned to be a blacksmith after his job fell through milking cows because the barn burned down. So he learned the blacksmith trade. He decided it was time for him to start his own business. He heard that Chet McCone had a blacksmith shop in Lawler that was in need of a blacksmith. So basically, he moved to Iowa about 3 months before we did. He stayed at the hotel for a while. It seems Kate Lynch was the proprietor, and he didn't really get along with her, so he decided he would sleep just in the back of the shop for about a couple months. Then he moved us to Iowa. We played on the swings in Lawler at the playground until one day I was pumping up. You know, I don't think kids can stand up and pump on the swings anymore. But one of the neighbor boys rolled a tire under the swing, knocked the board out from under my feet. I broke my arm. So I spent the rest of my 3rd grade with a cast on my arm. Mom heard me screaming. She came, grabbed my arm, straightened it because it was my wrist that was broken. She took us down to see Dr. Corwig, who happened to live in Lawler at the time. He put a cast on my arm. So that was that. Let's see, what else? When about probably the summer after I was in 3rd grade, we had a coaster wagon. I don't know if you know what a coaster wagon is. It's different than a radio flyer like they have now, but they were a low wagon, and you put your knee in one of them and pushed yourself off with the other leg. It had the steering wheel that laid down over the bed of it, and you could steer with the handle. So anyway, Roger decided that he was, I don't know what he decided. Anyway, he took a ride. We lived about 3 blocks from Main Street.
A load of bricks too.
What?
I also had a load of bricks on.
So anyway, he drove down to Zatha Larson's store and turned on Main Street. I'm wondering, I don't know, but I'm wondering, he turned right, drove down Main Street, ended up in front of Junko's house at the end of the sidewalk. He couldn't go any farther, so Mom sounded the alarm. Everybody went looking for Roger because I think us older kids were supposed to be watching him. Obviously we didn't. And so we found Roger, brought him home with his load of bricks. But he was a rambunctious little squirt even then. So, oh dear. In fifth grade, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs came out as a movie in the New Hampton theaters. So, the nuns decided that we would go to see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So how do you get a bunch of kids from 5th grade up to 8th grade to a theater in New Hampton when there were no school buses? School buses were a thing that had not come around to Lawler just yet. So one of the local truckers, might have been Jimmy Murray, might have been somebody else, I don't remember, but they loaded us in the back of that truck and took us to the movie in New Hampton. So we saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I think it was the first color movie I ever saw. So another time we rode a truck when I was in 8th grade to Decorah for our 8th grade picnic. And they also hired a stock truck to take us all to Decorah to the park. And then they brought us home, and we were perfectly happy. One of the nuns rode with us to Decorah to keep us all in line, and we actually had hay bales to sit on. In our house in Lawler, we had no running water. But there was a pump out back, and there was a lean-to on the side of the house that was the washroom. In order for Mom to wash, she had to heat the water on a cook stove in this lean-to type place. So she was heating the water, and she fired up the stove just a little too hot. Sparks flew out the chimney, caught the roof on fire. Dad was at the shop. Obviously, she rousted us kids, and maybe I was the first one dressed, I don't remember. But anyway, I was delegated to run down and tell Dad that the roof was on fire. So, barefoot, with my dress, I ran down to the shop. Oh my God. Halfway down there, I realized I forgot my underwear. I was so concerned that Dad was not going to discover it. Because when I got down there, I told him the house was on fire. He picked me up, put me into the passenger seat of the car, drove home. Mom obviously had pails of water ready, and he put out the fire. He never said anything about the fact that I didn't have my underwear on. And Mom never did either. I don't know, maybe I never told her. Anyway, but we dressed in a hurry. So, let's see. When I was in 6th grade, we had a major fire in Lawler. Dad was on the fire department. We were on the 2nd floor of Mount Carmel because we were in 5th or 6th grade. And we, of course, jumped up and looked out the windows. The teachers were not too enthused about us doing that. But anyway, we saw smoke and fire rising down toward town. We found out that the hotel was on fire. So Dad and all the firemen went and tried to put the fire out. They were not successful. The hotel burned to the ground. And it was a very cold winter day. When we got home from school, Dad was almost covered in ice. He was so cold. But the fire was burnt out, and the hotel was gone. They never did rebuild it. The hotel at that time was between Benny Nolte's store and the DX station. I don't know if any of you remember that. Somebody does. Okay. Anyway, for entertainment, we went to wedding dances. Everybody had a wedding dance here. And they were always free. So from the time I was in 7th and 8th grade, all my friends and I would meet at the dance hall. We'd dance all night for free. Maybe sometimes we took a gift if we knew the bride and groom. Most of the time we didn't even know them. But we went to dances anyway, and they were free. And we enjoyed it, and that was our form of recreation, because there wasn't much of anything else to do in Lawler. Maybe play ball. I did play basketball for a while when I was in high school. I was a freshman, and we played ball until yellow jaundice hit the school. And half the school came down with yellow jaundice, me included. So I was out for at least a month. Finally, we went back, and we played again. Again, when I was a sophomore, I played ball, not very well. I was never very athletic. I guess I was too lazy or something. I just did not do that. So anyway, Mr. McGreevy, who was our coach, loaded all the basketball girls into his car, the whole team, and drove us to away games. No school buses yet. Pretty crazy. It was amazing. I don't know how in the world he stood all us girls, but he did. He was an amazing man. So, after that, I went to Mount Mercy to college. Well, I went to IC Academy, and that was entirely different. Mom decided that the Lawler School was not teaching enough different classes to her daughters. Jeanette and Rosemary had been there for 2 years, so Rosemary graduated, so I had to go to be with Jeanette. I was a junior. So I went to IC, and it was a boarding school. We probably had 50 boarders at the school, and a day was almost like being in the convent, I guess, because they woke us up at 7 o'clock, we went to Mass, then we went to breakfast, we washed our own dishes, all in a community dish pan, reset the table, went to class. So we had class from 9 to 12, then we had lunch, washed our dishes again. If we had to work a little bit to help pay for our room and board, then we had to wash the dishes that were used to cook the meal. So that's what happened. Then we went back to school until 4 o'clock. We had probably half an hour to do as we pleased. I eventually had to sweep one of the rooms, but then I had free time until 5 o'clock where we had a study hall. We had a study hall till 6 o'clock. We went to supper. After supper, we of course did our dishes again. Then we went to the chapel and had evening prayers. Normally it was just the rosary. Then we could go to the recreation room. At 9 o'clock, it was time for bed. So we got ready for bed. Once, maybe twice a week, we got to sign up to take a bath. The rest of the time, we just washed up in a wash basin in our little cubicle. So about 9:30, lights were out, and that was the day. And I see there were a bunch of kids that just came from town who we called day hops. They went to school there, but they weren't boarders. So that was it. After that, I went to Mount Mercy, and I stayed with people then. And I was their maid, basically. They had a little boy. I helped serve their meals. I helped do the dishes, and I had to iron all the man's white shirts. Oh my God. I learned to iron white shirts, I'll tell you that. But anyway, after that, I had spent a year at Mount Mercy because that's all the time it took you to get your teacher's certificate at the time for the country schools. So then I started teaching in the country schools, and that was an education because I had never been to a country school in my life. I had all 8 grades, 9 grades actually, because there was kindergarten. and you had kids in every grade. You taught all the classes. You did all the cleaning. You had to get there by at least 7:30 in order to have the fire started so the school was warm enough for the kids. Then you were in charge of all these kids for the rest of the day. You had classes probably for 5 minutes, each class, because you had to teach each grade individually. I think sometimes the kids learned more from the other students than they did from me, simply because they were all sitting there listening, and the second graders could hear the eighth graders recite. So they learned from each other as much as they did from their teacher, which is a good thing because I don't know how good of a teacher I was. But anyway, I enjoyed it. I loved the kids. We supervised their recesses. After lunch, I always read them a story for about 5 minutes out of a novel, probably the Bobbsey Twins or something like that. Then we had our classes. On Fridays, when we had class, Friday afternoons, we had art and music. All the country schools had the same music. The county had bought us all records, and they were all the different songs that we had to know. We had a Victrola. Have you ever seen a Victrola? Anyway, that's the way we played music for the kids, and they all learned all the songs. Then we had art. So that was our Friday afternoon. And we hauled our own water because there was no drinking water in the school, and of course, outhouses for the kids. But it was very interesting and busy. The last couple of years, I actually drove an old Pontiac to school and took my little sister along. Eileen went to school with me for a year because she was too young for first grade in the Catholic school. So Mom and Dad, I don't know if they ever talked to the school board or if I just did it. But anyway, I took Eileen to school with me for a year. I put her into first grade. She wasn't old enough for school because her birthday was in January, and you had to be 6 by September 15th at the time. So I took Eileen to school, put her through first grade. Well, then after that school year, the nuns would not accept the fact that she was in first grade. So she went to the public school for 1 year, then she transferred back she went to the public school for second grade, then she transferred back to the Mount Carmel for the third grade. But anyway, then I met George Banwell. I got married. All the mothers in my school prepared the lunch for our wedding. So we didn't have to hire a caterer. The mothers all volunteered. So they made the dinner for our lunch, which was held in the basement of this hall, because that's where everybody had their receptions. That's just the way it was. And we got married on a Monday, because of course you couldn't get married on the weekend, because on Fridays you couldn't eat meat. On Saturday you had to get up and go to Mass in the morning, so that didn't work. And on Sunday you never got married on. So I got married on a Monday. It just happened to be a good time because Memorial Day happened to fall on a Sunday, on May 30th. So we got married on May 31st in 1954. And I became a farmer's wife, which was interesting, to say the least. We moved into an old house with no running water. Actually, we had running water. I ran across the road to get it. But it's just the way it was. And it was a cold old house.